So the challenge here today is to co-create, literally us in this room in 10 minutes. Most people get a year maybe to work on this problem, right? We're going to get 10 minutes to co-create a program to transform all 100% of existing schools, existing California public schools, to zero carbon schools by 2030. And we're going to create a new model together. Are you with me? Okay, so we need these few things. We need to share goals in the California context. We've got that already in our brains right now. This is the perfect setup. We need a participatory stakeholder process. We are missing a few stakeholders, like the school districts themselves and maybe a few regulators. But other than that, we need some basic understanding of the existing systems, which I will set us up for in the next few slides. And then again, we're going to need open hearts, open minds, and open hands to actually implement. We don't have time. Who knows if we're going to get commitment. Next slide. So you're going to create the budget by actually finding us the funding. So you've seen this before, but actually it's one of my favorite quotes. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you need to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And everybody can agree our existing schools are broken. Yes, we all agree. All right, next slide. We don't have time to go through this. Ask me at dinner time. If you've never heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, UN SDGs, here's all 17 of them. I was going to take you and map you how zero carbon schools, next slide, go into the UN SDGs, and it would be arguable. Environmental goals are obvious, but it would be arguable that not every one of those social and economic goals also map to zero carbon schools, for all the reasons that Joy said, for resiliency and creating centers of sustainable communities within every neighborhood. Okay, think about it, the tie-in with zero carbon schools and sustainability and community resiliency. Okay, keep that in the back of your minds. We also don't have time to talk about ownership of the built environment and the whole strategic reason for focusing on schools, as opposed to, I know this is a residential crowd, you know, single family, multifamily housing, blah, blah, blah. But not only for those other community and resiliency issues, I mean, think about it. How long would it take you to actually convince one homeowner to go ZNE, let alone zero carbon, and get rid of their gas cooktops? Okay, take that time and multiply it by how many owners of individual houses or buildings, residential sector, right? If you look at the whole ownership of the built environment, and I'm in this circle, so you have commercial, public, I mean, commercial business, basically your non-res, public and commercial businesses, private residential, all sorts of, and you have one other bubble, maybe that's NGOs or not public, not private as organizations. And then you have this thing called public. If you look at the public sector schools as a whole, as a system, and you could convince the Department of Education and DSA, which guides the school facilities in California, and you could actually get them into one mindset. Spend those 2 or 3 hours convincing that one as a mindset. You can change the whole system just like New York City did, okay? That could potentially be faster, easier, with more shared benefits and visible models and demonstrations of zero carbon buildings in the centers of each and every community. We drive by it, we go by it every day. So when we're talking about scale, next slide, that's what we need to think about. Think strategically about your targets of convincing sectors to go zero carbon. That's what I'm trying to switch our framework here a little bit. So some questions to think about. I'm not going to go through these. You should all have a shared, you all have your shared questions in front of you? Yes, no? Yes. Great, okay. So I'm not going to, yeah, questions to think about. So you've already read those, but essentially they all center around what one would need, right? What are the conditions that need to exist in our system, our state, to actually create zero carbon schools at scale? So here's a little bit about the existing context, right? Here, the problem is in California, in our K-12 schools, there's no statewide inventory, there's no benchmarking, we have no idea what our energy use is. Maybe a handful of school districts do, right? There's 1,000 and over 1,000 school districts in over 58 counties, right? You're getting this picture in your mind. 10,000 at least school campuses, and that's the Division of State Architect, DSA's estimates. We're not even sure how many campuses there are. There's an estimated, and this is even worse, there's estimated 5 buildings per campus, you know, and I suspect that there's more, especially if you're going to count all the little portable classrooms, right, and call each one of those a building, gangs of them a building. Buildings range between 1 and 100 years old on any one campus, literally. I live in, you know, Oakland Unified has literally campuses has, you know, the old gym is 100 years old, right, and then there's a new science wing, right. Many still have about 30% portable classrooms in all sorts of conditions. You have old, inefficient districts that cost them millions, if not billions of dollars a year in utilities costs. Okay, think of if you didn't have to pay that to your PG&E or SE or whatever, you could actually put that into your educational program for your kids, right? And it's well established that we're underfunded in all of our school facilities, including huge deferred maintenance, right, budgets, modernization, and new construction needs. Next slide. So here's the picture of the, hold on, I'm going to take this 1 second because I'm just going to set the rest of the picture and then maybe we can take a break. The current system of stakeholders right now, how many of you have ever worked on a public school? Oh, fabulous. In architecture and school facilities, like doing a project, either the modernization or new construction. That's terrific. Okay, so we have a great selection of folks in the room. There are about 100 school architects now who belong to this other organization, Coalition for Adequate School Housing. And this was my wild guess. I would say there's about 35, maybe, MEP engineers that do consistently only, and schools is their bread and butter, maybe. Who knows how many public bid school contractors there are that are willing to bid public bid jobs that do schools, which has all this special regulatory thing. They have to go through DSA, there's approval, another inspector of record. There's a whole other layer of bureaucracy, right, for doing school construction. And then in the black, you see on the district side, so some of the issues with district side staff and that whole ownership stakeholders. You know, there's sometimes a lack of leadership. Not every superintendent or district, you know, facilities officer is on board with, let's go ZNE, let's go zero carbon, let's, you know, it's not exactly the first thing on their minds, right? And they lack expertise and capacity. Rarely is there an energy manager in any of these 1,000 districts. There's no data management, there's no data gathering. And capital funding control, you know, and raising is separate from general funds, right? So operating funds, general funds is a complete separate thing from construction capital, right? Expenses and funding. So we end up with this also, this other disconnect, the third system of stakeholders. There's no motivation necessarily from our decision makers, the higher execs in the ownership or state level necessarily yet to commit and act to zero carbon schools, not even ZNE schools, right? The whole state is slowly crawling towards ZNE, and here we are trying to work towards decarbonization, right? So all of us as in systems, both of conditions of buildings and conditions of stakeholders' state of minds, our mindsets, we're all stuck, right, in business as usual models, okay? So part of this problem is that in each sector of people, you know, district owners and leadership, governmental owners, regulatory state leadership, and individual practitioners, that's all our implementers, right? Architects, engineers, contractors. We're all stuck here because, in fact, ZNE, zero carbon schools, is no one's goal and it's no one's job, right? So who's the chief officer of zero carbon schools in our state? Anybody? Well, one would need a job and one would need to be paid for that job, right? Okay, so we need awareness, training, funding, the whole shebang. So we actually, you know, need to think of this almost as also an economic job creation because there's plenty of work to do, right? And I'm not going to go through every one of these. Next slide, we're on past related programs and resources. Everybody knows in California, you know, we have these state bonds. Occasionally, they're matched with local bonds when you vote for your local bond for your school district, right? That's usual funding for school construction, modernization, or new construction. There have been 3 other special programs that actually have to do with funding energy efficiency related to that. The first one was the Prop 1D 8127 High Performance Schools Incentive Grant. How many of you remember that? Anybody? Sprinkling of hands, maybe 5. It was $100 million set aside for a 5-year program out of that bond, that big bond, Prop 1D. And out of $100 million, there was $38 million left on the table at the end, which we swept into new construction. And we don't have time to ask me at dinner. We don't have time to go into why that money was left on the table. Okay, but great question, Tom. DSA 2 years ago did a 7x7x7 program, Energy Water Design Initiative. It's on the web. I encourage you to go look that up. This says your internet connection is unstable. Okay, so got it. Okay. Okay, so the whole thing. Okay, right. Yep. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the rest of these things. The introduction to Alexis's part is she's going to tell you about the case study of the Prop 39 grant program, which was pre-allocated money for energy efficiency or renewables in schools, and that grant program is ending this year. And PG&E actually ran a special pilot program where they said, we're going to take the Prop 39 program for energy efficiency and renewables, we're going to combine that and see if we can marry it to ZNE, to take deep energy retrofits to existing school buildings to see if we can take them to ZNE. And that's my lead in to you, Alexis. You want to take it away?
Okay, great. Yes, I'll try to go quickly. So, hi, everybody. So, Alice is right. The ZNE program, the PG&E ZNE pilot, is what I'm going to talk about to show you how to get to these retrofits to get to zero energy and zero carbon, and what we learned along the way. And just so you know, Prop 39, what it did was it said, you can have this money, you schools, to use for energy efficiency as long as the savings to investment ratio is greater than 1.01. And that's the net present value of the energy and maintenance savings over the project installation cost minus other rebates and grants and such. Next slide. So what this meant is that we went through and we found all of those universal things that can be rolled out across lots of schools by doing these pilots. And it's things like this. It's lighting using LEDs. We really found it more cost effective to put the tubes in, not replace the whole fixture. It's solar tubes in the roof, which can just be plopped in to most schools, which are mostly 1 or 2 story. It's new HVAC units when the equipment is ready to be replaced anyway, put in the more efficient units, and it's solar. Next slide, please. And so what were the outcomes? I'm just going to show you a couple of case studies. And Alice, there's a lag time, so I'm just going to keep talking, assuming that you have flipped over to the next slide.
Are we on Newcastle? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, got it.
So what were the outcomes of, I'm just going to go over 2. One is a little elementary school northeast of Sacramento, Newcastle. And as you can see, we were able to reduce the energy use, the site energy use intensity by 32%, even though the school was originally actually pretty efficient. It only had an EUI of 20. We got it down to 14 by doing these very basic things that I told you about. And it only cost $27 a square foot, including the solar PV that we installed to make the building net zero. And it had a 20-year net present value of $153,000. So that school is now saving $31,000 a year in electricity and also some money in gas. Next slide shows Santa Rosa Junior College in Santa Rosa. And this one was a much more inefficient building. It actually had an EUI of about 66 originally, and we reduced that 63% also with these basic same things, you know, the LED lights and the variable air volume upgrade of this very inefficient old building, Emeritus Hall. And one thing that and again, it was very cost effective. I mean, here we spent $54 a square foot to achieve net zero, including the PV. And they're going to be saving $735,000 over the 20-year net present value. So basically, their annual savings is $148,000 a year, electricity and gas. And I just want to point out quickly that one thing that we did was, at that very first bar, is we replaced the gas boilers with an air source heat pump. And although the system penalizes you for getting rid of gas because it uses source energy instead of site energy, so gas, you only have to produce 1/3 of the photovoltaic energy to compensate for your gas that you burn on site. Source, you for electricity, you have to produce all of it. And still, because the heat pumps are more efficient, that was also cost effective to do. And you can talk more about that later, but the electrification case is cost effective. On the next slide, you'll see then kind of a summary of outcomes, of lessons learned, including electrification being cost effective, including the fact that it is not cost effective to simply replace a perfectly good piece of equipment. You have to wait till it's needing maintenance or replacement, but believe me, there is plenty of equipment at these schools that are way past due. Also, you have to think about where you're going to put the PV, and if that's a 10-year-old roof, you're not going to have a 20-year warranty on your roof to put solar on it, so you're going to have to recoat your roof, and it may not be cost effective until that roof needs to be replaced anyway. So you might want to then, in that case, put the PV somewhere else, like a parking lot or over a play structure. Simplify the retrofit if you can, to eliminate having to do structural upgrades, to again eliminate fixtures if you can just replace the lamps. These are going to save you money. And think about the benefits beyond the savings to investment ratio. There are additional benefits of daylighting, of replacing loud HVAC systems that teachers actually turn off because their students can't even hear them when they're lecturing, with quiet, efficient new units, which then produce the air quality in the rooms that the kids and teachers need. And finally, occupant training is really essential. You can have all the best daylighting in the classroom, but if you cover it up with posters or you put your blinds down, it doesn't do a lot of good. Same thing with the HVAC units. You have to turn them on and use them to get that fresh air. And on the next slide, a few more lessons that we learned.
Sorry, we only have a couple more minutes, Alexis, so maybe you can, people can read most of them.
I think I'm pretty much done. I mean, again, you want to prioritize your zero energy retrofits across the district and roll out some of these measures as toolkit measures across all of the districts in California, just like the presentation that was talking about bulk purchasing of recyclable trays. You could bulk purchase LEDs, you could bulk purchase solar tubes, and make those things affordable. And that's it. Right. I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Alexis.
My last slide.
Yeah, that last point you can read yourself, but in fact, if you don't have to pay to overproduce PV to get to ZNE, offset your gas, right? You're saving on the offset of the third of the PV that you'd have to pay for to offset your gas, and you're saving on, paying your gas to in the event that you actually decarbonize anyway.
Very quick. We'll
So,
do the applause, then we're gonna do the cue. This part. Like, yay, Alexis!
Thank you for that. Okay, so I am not going to read through these. You guys have them before you. I'm going to click through them really quickly for folks on Zoom. But this is a basic school modernization, business as usual. But everything from the decision making to the procurement process, right, to the actual implementation is what we need to change. And the next slide shows you the context of the problem at scale, literally. If we have 10 years, let's just assume we can use 2019, between now and 2019 to plan this new program. And you started between 2020 and 2030. You'd have to do those 10,000 campuses in 10 years. How would you do it effectively? How would you do it equitably? How would you do it at scale? All right. So here's a reminder. The next slide is, again, your reminder. If you want a reminder of the system of stakeholders and do some math, you can do that. I'm going to now turn it over to you guys for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, however much we got. Take your stickies in front of you. Do any of you need like a marker or a big something fat to write with? Maybe Avery, you can grab that bunch and hand them out. Raise your hand if you need a marker.
The request that you
But the request is take 10 minutes to think about the next 3 questions, which are also, if you're in the room at the bottom, you have 3 questions. They're related to these 3 questions, starting with 1, 2A and 2B, and 3. First one is think about districts and decision makers. If you were a school district, right, in order to transform all existing public school districts, schools to ZNE and decarbonize towards zero carbon schools, what do district owners need? So put yourself, you know, you have no resources, no capacity, no expertise. You don't know what the hell ZNE is, let alone decarbonization. What do you need? Write that down and then stick them. We had two, Catherine and Lynn. If you can hand them to the end of your rows, they'll come post them up on the wall up here. Second question, as people are thinking of that one. Question 2, leadership or funding. So 2A is leadership, 2B is funding. In order to transform all existing public schools to ZNE and decarbonize towards zero carbon schools by 2030, what can the state, meaning legislature, right, regulatory agencies do to help address needs? I'm going to give you one hint too, right? Along with, you know, there's EPIC grants, there's all this cap and trade money, right? There's Prop 39 funding, there's regular school bonds. In addition to that, right, there's this thing called public goods charge. It's about $1 million a year, right? Excuse me, $1 billion a year on that order of scale, right? It comes off of everybody's ratepayers, you know, a little bit off of each bill that we pay. And they aggregate that out, and CPUC uses that to actually do these grant programs. They fund these studies and so on and so forth. So my question to you is, do you think some of that $1 billion a year could be strategically spent to create these centers of resiliency called zero carbon schools in every neighborhood, right? And think about the state energy goals, think about the equity goals. And the schools actually, Prop 39 actually was also looking at disadvantaged communities in that light as well. So it pre-allocated more money to those that had more Title I kids that had free and reduced lunch. Third question, last question. For implementers and practitioners. Think now, what do we need? The A, E, and C community, design build teams. What would we need to transform all the schools to zero carbon by 2030 at scale? I mean, don't just think about your firm. Okay, I want 10 projects. I can do 10 projects a year. Great, I'm done. I don't have to think about the other 9,990 projects, right? We need to think bigger than ourselves and think not just, I got my share, I don't care. How can we all equitably share in that pie, share in that work, so that there's so much work to be done, we can all get work. Can we train, right? Can we help our neighbor, right? Redwood Energy does this, right? They were mentored, they mentor others. Take your unknowledgeable run-of-the-mill engineering firm or architecture firm next to you, pull them in, partner with them first, train them how to do this work, because there's so much of it. We need all hands on deck to do this at scale. So while you're thinking, I'm going to pass out a little refresher. I made some chocolate biscotti for us all. So take one and pass it down, and hopefully we'll get around and go around again.
And you are in charge of completing this for the next 6 minutes. Do what you can, because you need to go walk down and hop in. The
Okay, so for every bite you take of that, write the sticky down and put something up on the wall. And I'm happy to take the front row and put them up if you got them. You had a question.
Don't allow installation of any more new natural gas equipment.
No, exactly. It's prohibited right there. None. It's not even a single one. That's a great idea. That would trigger the money that they do have to be consistently used in the right way.
Practice that money for replacing stuff available.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like that's the rule.
All right. How many minutes do we have?
5 Wherever you want.
So for those of you, if you're still on Zoom, if you want to put something into the chat, you can also put something in the chat. We'll put it up here on the board and add in. Thank you. Got ones and twos, or over a lot. Oh, great. Ooh, these are great. Stunning. Nice. Covered up with some trees. Okay, we're just all the ones go up. Okay, cool. Thank you.
That was an easy task.
I know. So we solved the word problem in 10 minutes? Yeah. Yeah, let me get another. Come on. Sorry, number one. Oh, thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming to participate in Zoom, and we are done for the day. You can sign back on tomorrow at 8:15 and hear some more talks. Thank you.